All right, we are live.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the first of our series with Purdue Extension. This is going to be our Repel the Invaders series, where this is the first of 4 that we're going to do. All of them will be on Wednesday from 12:30 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. And we will cover, today we'll cover herbaceous plants, but we will cover grasses the next time, trees and shrubs will follow, and then vines will wrap everything up on May 13th. So make sure you get signed up for that, and we'll hope to see you here at the same time, same place. And so you can see that on your screen. That is our flyer and how to get registered for that. So today for our session, we're going to cover invasive herbaceous plants. And I want to thank Purdue Extension for hosting this series with us with SICM, and everyone for joining us today. And I'm going to close off my camera so that you guys can just only see the screen in front of you. There we go. So first things first, I'd like to introduce myself. Since this is the first of our series, want to let you know how this came to be and who I work for. And what we'll do is we'll talk about the herbaceous plants, and then at the end we'll do a call to action. So at the end of each one of our series, we want to do a section of the series on what you can do to help, what you can do. So you've learned about these plants, now what can you do to move forward? So I'm Amber Slaughterbeck. I'm the West Central Regional Specialist with SICM in support of the Indiana Invasives Initiative. I've been in Indiana my whole life. I grew up in Lafayette. I live now in Terre Haute, Indiana. I've been here for quite a while in Vigo County. I worked previously, before SICM, I worked as a naturalist at the state and also at the county level. So I've been working for wildlife for a good while. And I serve on a few different boards as Director of Stewardship for the Wabash Land Conservancy, and then as founder of the Wabashiki Turtle Research and Rescue Team, and with the Indiana Native Plant Society, which I'll talk about later. And I volunteered to pick up trash locally with the Society of Trash Baggers. So those are just some of the things that I'm involved in as a volunteer. So I work for SICM, Southern Indiana Cooperative Invasives Management. You can see on the screen, those are the counties that we used to cover. Primarily, we were in the South, and we covered 35 counties. We have now entered into a partnership with NRCS, and it is called the Indiana Invasives Initiative. And you can see it started in 2018. So what is the Indiana Invasives Initiative? We are now statewide, so it's a statewide collaboration. We are doing a multitude of things. We're managing invasive plants by raising public awareness. That is a big task of ours. We're raising public awareness statewide, and we're doing that through a number of ways. Landowner surveys and management plans, that's something that I would encourage everyone to get involved with. That is where your regional specialist in your area will actually come to your property. They will let you know what invasives you have on the land, as well as what natives you're looking at that are great to keep. And we will then write a management plan for you. Once we leave your property, we will give you a management plan that will help you move forward and appropriately address the invasives that are on your property with the proper timing. And if you are using an herbicide, we'll let you know what to use. Another thing we're doing is outreach events and materials. We've done over 400 outreach events and meetings just in the last few years. So we've been quite busy and getting the word out there. We're also developing and enhancing partnerships that are either pre-existing or we're putting them together. So we're bringing people, not only professionals, but individuals just in the communities that are concerned, bringing them all together so that we can work together to manage these invasive species. And of course, with that, we identify community resources that are available in each of those counties to make sure that we all know what we're working with, and each community is different. So we are working hard to identify what we have in each of those communities. Our big goal is to start what are called Cooperative Invasive Species Management Areas, or CISMAs for short. And those are those groups in each county that will be working to develop management plans for their community, develop master plans so they can move forward. They're developing their names and their mission statements and even bylaws, and they're meeting regularly to address what's going on in their community. So they're bringing their concerned citizens together at the table to figure out how to best move forward. They're doing that with the assistance of 5 regional specialists, so I'm just one of 5, and we also have a project coordinator. So you can see there the map of where we all are, where your regional specialists are. I'm in the orange color, and then everybody else is color coded. So if you are, wherever you are in the state, if you reach out to your closest regional specialist, we will get you involved in the Indiana Invasives Initiative. We'll let you know if there's a working SISMA in your area, or if there isn't a SISMA in your area, we will let you know how to get one going, and we'll help you with that. So that's the regional specialist job, is to facilitate and get those SISMAs off the ground, and also to help raise public awareness. So that's the Indiana Invasives Initiative. We hope you get involved if you're not already. So what is an invasive species? We definitely have to cover this because that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about a native species which has been in Indiana a very long time, evolving together and working together. And so an invasive species is something that's non-native. You got to start there. It's something that is not native to Indiana, generally speaking, not even native to our country. So it's not native, and then not only is it not native, but it's causing harm. So it's causing harm to our economy, our environment, and also harm to our health, harm to our human health, harm to animal health, either our pets or our livestock, and also wildlife, and also harm to, of course, the plant health. And so if you harm plant communities, you're obviously going to harm everything up the food web, right? So that is an invasive species. On the screen, you can see 3 different types of invasive. So we have the wild feral hog, which is thankfully only in a very small area of our state. Then you have Asian bittersweet, which is a vine that we will cover at the end of this series. And then the dreaded emerald ash borer that many of you are probably familiar with, that just decimated our ash trees across our state. So what can we do? We are going to cover some management ways that you can get rid of these invasive species throughout the entire program. We will talk about identification of that invasive and then proper removal. And I will refer to SICM's Indiana General Chemical Control Recommendation Calendar, or Calendar of Control. And we do have documents that we've put together in a file folder for you that will have all sorts of fact sheets about invasives that we cover, and also additional ones that you can study yourselves during the program or after the program. And this document is also in there. So as you're moving along and you're trying to figure out what invasives I can be controlling at this time of year, this is a good stepping stone for you, a good place to start. You can see we're in the month of April, and there aren't very many on the front of this sheet that you should be controlling right now. But as you look to the future and you look to the summertime, there are some invasives that if you have those on your property, you can be working towards those, okay? So you can start to actually plan and prioritize what you need to work on. Everything on this calendar is also color coded for you. So follow that color, go down to the bottom, and that will tell you what herbicide you can be using. Now, if you have a management plan, we're going to write all of this out for you. So I highly encourage everyone to get a management plan. On the back side, so it's a front and back document. On the back side, we're going to cover those herbaceous invasive species there at the top. We'll cover a few of those. The ones that we don't cover on this presentation, I have put some fact sheets in that box folder that we're talking about that you can go through and you can look at those species at your leisure and learn about those. And then, of course, ask questions. Always turn to your regional specialists for questions. And then at the bottom, you see grasses and trees. So we will cover those in the series. And we'll cover more than just those few species of grasses next time. At the very bottom of the document, I want to point out, so you're looking through the document and you see that you need to use, let's just say 20% glyphosate. Well, what is glyphosate? How do I use that? Where do I go? Where do I even start? We'll go to the bottom of the sheet. It's going to tell you what a glyphosate is. So those are just examples of some common brand names of glyphosate, triclopyr, imazapyr, etc. So those are just some examples. You can usually, if you live in an area where there's a farm store, like a Tractor Supply or a Rural King, you can go to those stores and get a generic brand of these herbicides, and those are going to be a concentrated version, so they're going to last a little bit longer, but you will have to make sure you're measuring and doing the right measurements as far as diluting them down. Number one, no matter what you see on this calendar, whatever herbicide you purchase, you need to read that label front to back. That label will tell you everything, and it is the law. So whenever you're going to use an herbicide, you need to be very prepared for everything that is in that label. So it's going to tell you what you need to have as far as PPE goes. Do you need gloves? More than likely you do. Do you need goggles? So make sure that you're reading that, especially if you're in an aquatic area. You want to make sure that you're using aquatic herbicide, and you can see some of those are listed there at the bottom of the sheet. But make sure that you're using the proper herbicide for the proper area. But number one, always read that label. It is the best thing for you to keep you safe and to keep you save you some money, because if you use it improperly, you're going to waste your time and your money. So make sure you're reading that label so you're not harming yourself or wildlife or getting any of that herbicide into maybe a waterway. Okay, so number one, read the label. Use your pesticides wisely. So for today, we're going to cover those species at the top. We're going to talk about Canada thistle, garlic mustard, knotweed. Okay, we're going to cover those, and you can see when you should be controlling those, which almost all of them are right now. Okay, so you want to, if you have these species, we want to see you controlling those, and this is a good document to get you going. So let's talk about foreherbs. All right, garlic mustard. Many of us have been pulling this plant for a very long time before we even knew about the other invasive species. This plant has been around and escaped since 1868. So we've been working with this species for a great long time, and it was actually in the garden. It was a garden species because you can eat this plant. It is a mustard, and so if you break off a leaf of this plant and it smells either sometimes very strongly, especially in those young plants, as you go later in the year, it won't smell as strongly as garlic, but it will taste like garlic. So you can actually use this plant in all types of ways. You can use it in pesto. We've put it on spaghetti before. So if you do pull it, that's an option for you. So it is a biennial in the mustard family. It does have the first year rosettes are kind of kidney shaped. And you can see that picture there in the top. That's what you're going to see that first year. Nothing really obvious about it, just kind of blends in with the other green plant life this time of year. Everything's turning green. So you might think it's okay. You might not know anything about that plant and think it's okay to leave it. The second year, you're going to see that plant grow much taller, up to 4 feet tall, and it's going to start to produce a white flower. So I looked around, and in Vigo County, it is flowering right now. So I imagine in southern Indiana, it's either flowering or even maybe starting to go to seed. Maybe up in the northern lakeshore, it might just be flowering, but you guys can let me let me know what you think, where you're at in the state as far as this plant goes. So always make sure that depending on where you're at, you look at the life stages of that species and determine, is this a good time to control it? With garlic mustard, you want to get it before it goes to seed. So if you're in that first year, definitely pull it out. Pulls out usually relatively easily. Sometimes you'll break off that root and you'll have to dig down a little bit. But make sure you get that whole plant out of the ground. The second year, if you see that white flower, it's go time. You really need to make sure you get that plant before it sets seed. Why is that? Well, if it does set seed, you can see the picture where it's just a solid mat of garlic mustard. Garlic mustard has the ability to poison the soil. And when it poisons the soil, it of course hurts everything, right? You won't have any native wildflowers. It'll just be a sea of garlic mustard. And it also will kill a native butterfly called the West Virginia white. So if the butterfly were to, say, lay its eggs on that, the plant of the garlic mustard, and then the babies come out, little caterpillars come out, and they nibble on that, it can actually kill that larvae. So it stops that butterfly right in its tracks. It's really unfortunate. So it's not only harming plant communities, but it's harming our insect communities as well, which harms everything, right? And you can see that some studies are showing that the seed will remain viable for up to 10 years. What that means is that seed can lay on the ground for 10 years. You don't even know it's there, and then voila, you have a plant, and it's garlic mustard. So that's a really nasty surprise, isn't it? So how do you get rid of it? What do you do when you see it like that, where it's not flowering, it's a low to the ground plant? That's a great time to start pulling it. And you don't have to use an herbicide if it's just a small population. Even large populations, if you have the drive, you can pull it. We have pulled miles and miles of this down roadways, about 5 miles of roadway we've pulled for many years. So you can do it, but you want to make sure that you're not only just pulling it, but you're bagging it. Okay, so you definitely want to make sure that you're not just laying it on the ground. Sometimes that can be really hard if you're maybe in the way back section of the woods, bagging it and then pulling that bag out of the woods can be difficult. But you got to do it, because if you just leave it there, it can actually produce seed and still continue to create plants. So the best thing to do and the responsible thing to do is to get rid of it, make sure that that plant is properly disposed of. There are a couple caveats to when you do bag it. So if you're bagging it and you're sending it to the landfill, it can be a little unsightly, but we recommend that you actually leave that bag in the sun for a little while, until when you open that bag, you can tell that that plant is dead. It'll be very obviously dead. It'll stink, it'll be black and gooey. So try and do that. I personally like to open up the bags and burn it. So I'll take it to my burn pile where I know that it's being disposed of and it won't harm anything ever again. So I like to burn it. That's one option if you have that availability. But no matter what you're doing, if you're working in a parks area, you do want to make sure that if park staff are taking that bag from you, they're properly disposing of it. Make sure that they're not opening those bags and then dumping them in like a small section of the woods or something back at their maintenance shop. You make sure that they know that this plant cannot be just dumped in a compost pile or off in the woods. Okay. As far as a chemical goes, I've actually never used an herbicide on garlic mustard. I've always just pulled it. There's something really great about coming out of the woods with bright green hands after a full day of garlic mustard pulling. But if you are using a foliar application, maybe you're controlling acres and acres of solid garlic mustard and you got to get ahead of it. What you can do is, again, follow that label of the herbicide you're using, but use a foliar application. That's basically where you take a wand and you spray the leaves with an herbicide. So you want to kind of do that early on. The reason being is we all know that there are a lot of native species coming out right now. You don't want to be dousing a bunch of natives, not only the native plants, but also your pollinators. You don't want to douse them in herbicide. So doing it as early as possible is your best bet, but just make sure you're getting this plant under control. So early timing is ideal, okay? So you don't want to harm your native species. February to May is really a good time. So get out there. If you're using an herbicide, get out there and do it before she gets into the flowering and then the seeding stage. You don't want that to happen. It says there you can use a 1/4% non-ionic surfactant. So this is just an example. Sidekick 2 is just an example of one of those non-ionic surfactants that you can order. It does come in a relatively large jug, and you don't need that much, depending, of course, on your acreage. But you just put a little bit in, just a 1/4%, okay? And that will help to, that surfactant is basically just cutting down the surface tension. So between the liquid of the herbicide and the leaf, it's going to help that herbicide actually get to the leaf better, okay? So that's garlic mustard. Now let's talk about two that you definitely do not want to get your hands on without gloves, okay? You do not want to touch these two plants. The one on the left is called poison hemlock, the purplish color stalk plant. The one on the right is called wild parsnip. They are two different plants, but they are both harmful, okay? Both in the carrot family. There is another plant that's invasive that resembles poison hemlock quite a bit, called Queen Anne's lace. It looks very similar to it. The difference is, well, there's several differences, but one of the differences is that Queen Anne's lace is not harmful in the way that it's going to hurt your skin. It also has a white flower, just like poison hemlock. So you're going to look for that purple speckling on the stalk of the plant to distinguish it from Queen Anne's lace. Okay, that's the best way. And then later in the year, it's going to be very obvious if you were to see them side by side. Queen Anne's lace does not get up to 8 feet tall. Poison hemlock gets very tall. So poison hemlock has those fern-like leaves on the top there. They're pinnately compound. The big white flowers are in early summer. So some of you may be starting to see this poison hemlock really get quite tall right now. So it's getting close to that stage of pushing out that flower at this time of year. It is toxic if ingested. That's important for anyone that has animals in pasture. Okay, you really need to make sure that this plant is not ingested by your livestock. So you want to get rid of this plant as soon as possible. You definitely don't want your livestock consuming it. So that is poison hemlock on the left with those purple stalks. Wild parsnip, however, has a yellow flower and doesn't get as tall. So it only gets up to 4 feet tall. It does have similar leaves. You can see there on the bottom. That will be so that's poison hemlock, and then that's wild parsnip leaves. So if you were to see them side by side, it would be very obvious, but it can be confusing, okay? The yellow flower is going to tell you that you're looking at wild parsnip. Both of these grow in similar habitats as well. They both will easily take over a ditch or roadside. That seems to be a very, very big place that you usually find them. And also your pasture. They'll spread quite easily in your pasture. So look for the different leaves this time of year and the flowers later on. Wild parsnip is different from poison hemlock, and as which it will cause extreme dermal reaction. If you were to touch this plant and then spend some time out in the sun, which if you're outside working and you accidentally touch it and you're out in the sun in the summertime when this plant is out, it will cause some really nasty blistering. Sometimes you'll have to go to the hospital. It'd be so bad. I do have a flyer on what that looks like, so I'll show you here in a second. But you definitely don't want to touch either of these plants, okay? Make sure that your hands are covered, your arms are covered. You don't want to get anything obviously on your face, so maybe using a bandana over your face would be beneficial. I've used goggles. You don't want it in your eyes. So be very careful with both of these. That's nothing to play around with. They're both monocarpic, so short-lived perennials, easily spread by seed in late summer. So that's how they're mostly spreading. We do also sometimes drag the seed around in our mowers, so make sure that you're not doing that. And this is what can happen if you touch the wild parsnip. This is a really great flyer put out in Wisconsin. So it causes burn scars and will also hurt your pets. So it potentially could hurt your livestock as well. It'll burn them similar to how we get burned. So if their skin's exposed to it and then they're out in the sun, it can also hurt them as well. You can see there on that arm, that is the blistering that will be caused. Really, really nasty blisters. Nobody wants to be exposed to that. So be very careful, okay? Just make sure that you're not getting exposed to this. So how do you control it if you can't touch it? What I do with either of these is if I am going to pull it, I make sure that the gloves that I'm using are disposable, so I never use them again. So use some nitrile gloves and then get rid of them. So cut the root about an inch below the ground, or you can also pull them out, get to the soil and really work those roots out. You can do annual mowing. Again, just make sure that you're not spreading that seed. And then you can do foliar application. This time of year is a pretty good time to do that with glyphosate or triclopyr on the basal rosette. So that's the plant that's at the base of the ground, okay? You don't obviously want to spray anything too high or you'll possibly expose yourself to glyphosate or triclopyr on yourself. I put more information about both of those plants in the folder that we're going to give to you guys, and I also will provide this PowerPoint, so you will have that information later on. Okay, Canada thistle. This one has very, very spiky leaves, so if you do touch it, it's very sharp. It was introduced unintentionally, potentially as a seed contaminant in the 1600s, so it's been around for a long while. It is a perennial noxious weed in Indiana. So if you have a weed board, this is a plant that you want to let them know that it is present in certain areas. You want to make sure that they know about it. It should be controlled. And the reason being is it spreads rapidly. It does get up to 4 feet tall, and those spines on the leaves on the margins will definitely let you know that you're dealing with a thistle. Purple to pink flower heads June to October. Can grow in a large range of conditions. And those seeds, which you can see in the picture there, the big puffy seed heads, those seeds can spread for a long ways. They just blow in the wind. So you can see why it might form a dense mat of nothing but Canada thistle. And you can see how it spreads rapidly. So just one plant, you can imagine, would produce quite a few of the same plant. And so we do have native thistle. So you want to make sure that you're doing proper identification and looking at Canada thistle before you control it, because our native thistle, they actually are really great for pollinators, all sorts of pollinators, beetles, flies, wasps, our solitary bees. Lots of pollinators love our native thistle. So Canada thistle is the one you want to control. So how do you control it? Well, mechanically, you can mow it continuously for up to 4 years. You want to do it in intervals as well, okay? Or to suppress seeding, you can cut or mow annually 8 to 10 inches in mid to late spring. So that's now. So you can do it that way. You can also, if you have a small population, you can of course dig these out. Make sure that if it's already flowering, that you're bagging it, because you don't want to leave that flower there to potentially seed out, and then you'll have more plants. And so if you're using an herbicide, you want to target that root system with a foliar application of herbicides called clopyralid or aminopyralid. Canada thistle and the other invasive thistles, so bull thistle is also another invasive, and spiny plumeless thistle is another invasive thistle. They really like aquatic areas, so I've seen them grow quite a bit in our mine ground regions here in Indiana. So if they're anywhere near an aquatic area where you can see waterways, excuse me, make sure that you're using that labeled herbicide for that aquatic area. But you will foliar spray, and make sure you do it before it goes to flower. So you really want to get it before it has all of its energy in the top of that plant. And generally speaking, it does require repeated or combined, so mowing and herbicide. Or digging, and you'll get it, but it does get rid of. Okay, Japanese knotweed. Put a few pictures up there for you of what it's looking like now, currently in Vigo County. It's really just starting to get about knee high to waist high. Excuse me, but it does grow relatively fast. So if you watch it, it'll start out just poking through the soil, and a few weeks later, it's already waist high. It grows very fast. But it's brought to the U.S. as an ornamental. It's, again, been here for a good while. It is shrub-like, but it is not a woody shrub. And we've heard it called a lot of things. Heard it called bamboo. It is not bamboo. But it has this dense mat of rhizomes, and that's what makes it a difficult plant to control. Is below the ground, it's just spreading like a mat underneath the ground. So getting those small populations under control is your best bet. If that's something that you have on your property or a property that you're managing, you want to prioritize Japanese knotweed. It will form dense stands, crowding out all native plants. You can see that there's a person in there, and you can barely see them, right? That's how tall it gets. It gets very tall, so you can imagine nothing will grow underneath it. It will crowd out everything. It does damage asphalt and foundations and sidewalks. It will again, that dense mat of rhizomes will push up concrete, will break foundations. Definitely something you don't want on your property. Even though it was introduced as an ornamental, because the flowers are quite pretty, no argument there, the flowers are pretty, but the devastation of this plant and what it causes, you want to make sure that you're getting rid of it. So you can see the speckling on the stalks of the plant. The leaves start out kind of arrow-shaped, but then they get very broad and almost heart-shaped as the season goes on. Okay, so that's Japanese knotweed. How do you control it? You can see there what it looks like when it really starts to come through the soil. And that is along a wetland. So you want to make sure, again, to use an aquatic herbicide label for anything that's along a wetland. And Japanese knotweed does tend to spread fast and rapidly through a wetland area. So mowing is not recommended. If you mow this plant and pieces of it hit the ground, they can actually sprout roots. So don't want to mow it, because you can shoot it all over the place and end up with a worse space than what you started with. So if you have a small space and you mow it, you can actually end up spreading it and making a problem for yourself. You can dig out this plant if you have a small area. I highly recommend doing that. Just dig it out. Make sure you discard properly of that material. There have been some cases where you smother the plant. That's where you put a tarp or some thick plastic over it before it gets tall, obviously. And so early in the season, and then you put a bunch of mulch on top of that tarp and leave it for years and years. The only problem with that is it doesn't always work. And it's also been known to sprout around the tarp. Because of that dense mat of rhizomes, it can actually send up plants on all edges of the tarp where you're trying to smother it. Trying to save itself, essentially. So smothering is one option if you're not so sure about using herbicide. If you have a small area, that might be an option that you choose. But you might be surprised after having it smothered for a few years that when you remove that tarp, it's still there and persisting. So if you were to use a foliar spray on this one, you want to use, again, aquatic label if it's on the wetland area, or just a glyphosate. You can also treat these plants. So you would actually go around and cut every one of those stalks that you see on the screen and then paint that herbicide directly on that cut. And not cut it and then come back the next day and paint that herbicide on, but cut it and immediately, as soon as you cut it, I like to paint it. So that plant is going to try and save itself, and it'll start to seal up as soon as you cut it. So just try and get that herbicide on there within at least 15-minute window. So get that herbicide on when you cut it. You can see that the most effective time to be treating this is a little bit later in the year. So this is something that you can be planning to control. If you are dealing with it now and you want to keep it down, you can go and cut it. Remember, don't mow it, but you can cut it down and make sure that it's not getting too tall so that when it does come time to foliar spray it, it's not way above your head. So more ways that you can get involved and make a difference. We want to do a call to action at the end of every one of these presentations and make sure that we're engaging everyone that has joined us for our presentation and giving you things that you can do. So one of the things that you can do, of course, is figure out what are all the invasive plants in our state. These are the ones that we have data on. Okay, so the ones that are on this list, which I realize that it's hard to read on this screen, but this will be in your folder again. But figure out which ones are invasive, identify if you have this plant on your property, or maybe in a parkland nearby, or maybe your neighbors have it, and try to figure out how you're going to move forward and manage that plant. So there are a few plants on there for you to learn and to identify. So that's a good place to start, right? And then from that big list, we recently were able to get the terrestrial plant rule passed. And so you see 44 plants that are now no longer going to be sold in our state. And you can see the thistles that we talked about are on there. You can see that garlic mustard is on there, and knotweed is also on there. Oh, and poison hemlock. Almost forgot that one. So those are on there. They can no longer be sold, which is such a great thing. We're out there and we're combating these species, and now they won't be sold so that we're not continually combating these species from being planted. So that's the terrestrial plant rule. It began just a few days ago on April 18th, 2020. So no one may sell, gift, exchange. So you cannot be digging these up and handing them out, distribute, transport, or introduce any of the 44. And you can see that half of those were still in trade, so they were still being sold. If you do happen to see that any of these plants on the list are still sold at maybe a box store at your nursery, we want you to contact Indiana Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology. That's DEPP. They're going to be the ones that will enforce this rule. And so you want to reach out to them. Do take pictures if you're in the nursery and you see that plant with that scientific name on that list. Always check that scientific name. You see that plant as being sold, take some pictures of the tag with the scientific name in it, note what day you were there, maybe even if you have the ability to count if there's a whole pallet load or if there's just a few plants, and report that to the Department of Entomology and Plant Pathology. Another thing that we would like to ask is people download the app onto their phone, Great Lakes Early Detection Network. Or if you don't have a smartphone or smart device, you can go online to edmaps.org and report invasives that you see. We don't want you to report the shrub that's planted in landscaping. We want you to report the shrub that has spread all over the landscape, okay? So we want you to report those escapees. So anytime you can get out, this is a great time to do that. Anytime you can get out and report those invasives for us, that's going to help give us more data to show just how bad that species is in our state. And lastly, we want you to plant native. When you're getting rid of these invasive species, you might be exposing bare dirt, right? These invasives have been poisoning the soil, they've been crowding out the native species, they've been leafing out earlier than any of the others, and so there's nothing there. You have no natives, and you want to put something in. Well, you want to put in some natives, right? Indiana Native Plant Society is a great place to start. They have a website, and also the Grow Indiana Natives is a great place to go, because on that website on the screen, you can see all the nurseries and growers that are actively selling native plants in our state. So you can go on there, find the native nurseries. Of course, there might be some native plant sales that aren't happening currently, but looking towards the future, there are still plant sales for the fall still planned, and there's also the growers are still growing these native plants. So get on there, figure out what natives are good for your area, and put those in where the invasives once were. And then if you want to, you can also buy these really great signs that say "We Grow Indiana Natives," and then you can show those off and also talk to your friends and your neighbors and your family members and tell them why. Why do you grow natives? Here are all the image credits for the presentation today. I want to thank everyone for allowing us to use these images. And with that, we're always open to questions. That is my contact information. My cell phone is 812-229-3539. If you have a plant that you're not sure of and you want to ID it, you can actually text me images. If you don't know how to text, or you don't have a cell phone to text with, you can also email me. So get in touch with us. We have a great website at sickum.info that has tons of handouts on it and ways that you can get involved. We do have a really great conference coming up this year in August that we would like to see everybody at. So go onto our website, check that out. We have Facebook and Instagram, of course, so you can follow us on there. I want to thank everybody so much for listening in.